Today I wanted to do a pretty short video debunking one of my favorite arguments atheists like to use against the omnipotence of God. The argument is called the paradox of the stone, and it belongs to a larger family of omnipotence paradoxes. The argument basically goes as follows. If God is omnipotent, he can perform any task. Creating a stone so heavy that God cannot lift it is not possible if God can perform any task. Therefore, God cannot be omnipotent since he cannot perform any task. The argument seems logical at the outset until we start looking at its premises, where it falls apart very quickly. There are other variations of this argument, like God creating a prison so secure that he cannot break out of it, or God creating a four-sided triangle, or God creating a circle that is also a square. Many less intellectually rigorous or honest atheists love bandying these arguments about to try and gotcha believers, but the argument falls apart pretty quickly. The omnipotence paradox line of reasoning is classical sophistry at its core. Now, what do I mean by that? In ancient Greece, the sophists would use complex, quotes, logical reasoning to get people to admit logically contradictory things, like turning virtues into vices and that sort of thing. So they would, have some long line of reasoning to get people to admit that stealing was just or something like that. That's where we get the word sophistry from today, essentially the methods used by the ancient sophists, the essence of which is taking fancy language to fool people into accepting false conclusions or introducing confusion and doubt in a topic that doesn't need it or wouldn't otherwise have it in a very dishonest way. And that's exactly what the stone paradox is all about and what it's doing at its core. You see, the core problem behind the stone paradox is that the premise revolves around God accomplishing tasks that are semantically meaningless or logically contradictory. Of course, God cannot create a four-sided triangle because the basic definition of what a triangle is a shape that has three sides. This has nothing to do with God being all-powerful. It's just putting forth a logically contradictory scenario to try and gotcha believers into admitting that God, in fact, cannot do certain things, which sounds like a knock against omnipotence at the surface, but ultimately, it's just playing sneaky with definitions. God's omnipotence does not extend to semantically meaningless or logically contradictory things. God can do any meaningful or logically consistent task or action. I think an important thing to consider with the stone paradox is, what would a stone so heavy that God cannot lift it even look like in practice? It's this general good rule of thumb for evaluating these types of arguments that's helpful for breaking them down and analyzing if they're good or not. If we can evaluate the hypothetical as conceivable or not, it helps us to judge whether the argument is trying to actually say something or if it's just trying to, play with logically impossible things. So for example, I can't possibly imagine what a four-sided triangle might look like, or what a 12-inch long meter looks like, or a gaseous solid might look like. God's omnipotence extends to all rationally consistent tasks and objectives, not meaningless or contradictory tasks that we can't even conceive of in the mind. And that's where the stone paradox goes wrong. It's using a fundamentally wrong and definitionally incorrect use of the word omnipotence to try and disprove something that no deist would ever actually try to prove because it is senseless. This is why when we try to defend a certain doctrine of the faith, or even a belief we have outside of religion, it's seriously important to be specific and clear about what we're trying to say and define terms where necessary. So the paradox of the stone sounds impressive at the start, but ultimately it breaks down when you give it about a second glance. Now I'll end this video by saying I wanted to create this because I think this argument is something that gets used a lot to confuse people who haven't given it much thought, or don't have a lot of philosophical or theological experience. It's something that was personally a stumbling block for me approaching the faith when I was younger, so I wanted to shed some light on the topic and hopefully give you some more ammunition to defend the faith, or at least give you something to think about. I hope this video was helpful for you. If you enjoyed the video, let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this in the future. Thanks! and God bless.